All right, we are live. If everybody wants to just let me know in the chat if you can hear me, you can see me. That's great. Just let me know in the chat if you can see or hear me. That would be great. Perfect. Donna can, Shima can. Okay, great. Okay, very quickly, I just want to welcome everybody for this. If this is your first session to TMF Week, welcome to TMF Week, the biggest TMF event of the year. There are literally thousands of you that have registered for today's session. I am super excited to welcome a star-studded cast for our final panel of the day. I'm going to introduce our moderator and member of the advisory board, Donna Dorzinski, who is going to be leading today's panel and leading the discussion and the Q&A. But I would also want to just mention that if there are questions that you have for the panelists, please ask them in the Q&A chat as you go through. Donna and I, as well as others, will be monitoring this chat. So if there are questions that you have for the panel itself, please go ahead and add those to the channel. I know we started a little late, so I'm going to skip the pleasantries on my end, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to add these lovely ladies to the panel discussion. Today we're going to be talking about how does TMF Health impact study quality. And so Donna, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Oliver. It's so awesome to be here and to be a part of TMF Week. I'm going to start just by introducing myself and then have my amazing guest presenters and panelists join me as well. So I'm Donna Dorzinski. I'm president and CEO of Just in Time GCP. And so then from here, I'll offer it over to Mallory.
Hi, I'm Mallory Sayer. I'm currently at Moderna as the TMF manager, and I've been in the TMF world for 7 years at sponsors and CROs.
Thanks, Mallory. Christina?
Hi, Christina Monastero. I am Associate Director of Clinical Compliance at Adaptimmune. I've been in the industry for over 10 years now. Most of my experience has been in TMF. I just recently moved into the clinical compliance space, so very interested in quality and compliance as it relates to TMF and sort of inspection readiness and everything.
And Lorianne.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lorianne Verna. I'm the Director of Quality and Compliance at Just in Time GCP. And I've been in the pharma business for 26 plus years.
Yeah, once we get over 25, we don't like to tell you how long we've been doing this for, right?
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, ladies. I'm so excited to be working with you on this panel today. So we prepared a couple of questions that we would kind of get us jump started with. And I thought I'd start with one related to technology, just because I think everybody, obviously eTMF is technology centric, but I wanted to talk a little bit about metrics. Everybody, when I do sessions or when I just talk to folks, you know, metrics always come up. But we want to know the numbers, we want to see where we're at, and people like quick visuals. But I think there's limitations to these metrics. So I want to talk a little bit about what metrics are and what metrics are not. So I thought that would be kind of a nice topic, because metrics are not the answer to everything, but they're a great way of giving us kind of like a snapshot of where things are at. So Mallory, I thought I'd start with you and how, you know, you're using metrics in your organization to help kind of talk to the health of the TMF and impact the health of the TMF. But what are some of the challenges as well? So kind of a two-part question.
Sure. So right now with the metrics, we're kind of focusing on, which there are many, but our primary focus are the timeliness right now of, are the documents getting in around the time they're created, or is it something where it's put in a year later and we're questioning why? So that's always a fun one in the start. And then we're slowly branching out more into the metrics of kind of the rejection rates, what's going on, if there's functional areas, and really it's to the second point of the holdups and things, it's getting the functional areas kind of involved in that, because they're fine putting it in the system and then walking away, where we kind of need them to go through the steps and the processes. If there's a QC workflow they have to put it in through, or an approval workflow, and then just once we do our reviews, knowing that it's not over, we can come back and ask them for follow-up.
So that the functional areas are pretty challenging sometimes, right? Just getting them to to see the importance of TMF. Like everybody's got other jobs that they're trying to do, and then that TMF is sometimes a little bit of an afterthought. Have you used metrics with your functional areas as well to try and impact their vision into the TMF?
We are working on that. So we kind of have our generic dashboard type of metrics for the holistic view for study and then across the system so we can get the portfolio, and then mimicking that at the functional area level so they can go in and they're not bogged down by something that has nothing to do with them, and they can look solely at their documents and kind of how their department's doing. So that is stage 2, hopefully coming soon.
Exciting. How about you, Christina? Just kind of a little bit on like what metrics are and what's working, but then also some of the challenges that where metrics doesn't quite cut it for you.
Sure. Well, I'll preface this by saying that we just recently implemented our TMF a few months ago. So we're still sort of in the process. We're actually going through technical migrations today. So I'm in the middle of UAT. So this is my break. But so we're still working on sort of rolling out a metrics program. I do think, to your point, metrics are a real pain point for me. I will say, I think they, I'm used to working with a lot of companies that will show you these flashy graphs and pie charts and say, everything looks great, we're in the green, or look at how much % complete it is. And to Mallory's point, I think certainly for things that are more process compliance centric, so if you're looking for a timeliness measurement, or if you're looking for performance management to see how people are in the system, I think those are great tools for that. I do say in terms of completion and how complete your TMF is, how inspection ready your TMF is, I don't think that systems have been able to really address that as a hurdle for us. So I think a lot of us still are relying on very manual processes where when you were back doing a file audit in a paper TMF room or going out on to a CRO to do it, a lot of us are still reconciling things sort of outside of the system to do kind of more of that cross check. So I think it definitely has its limitations, and I think that's one, everybody, especially leadership team folks, they love to see the pretty pictures and think everything's great. I think you have to understand a lot of how a system is designed feeds into what you're looking at too. So if you use integrations, you may be getting data in real time. If you don't, who's managing certain things? So it's really only as good as the system is designed to support it.
That's for sure. I think that last statement, it's only as good as the system is designed. I think that's really important. And when you're setting up your TMF, when you're building it originally, if thinking about, what kind of metrics do I want to collect? What do I want the system to do? What don't I want the system to do? I think that's a great point. It's really, as part of the implementation, what information do I want to get out of here, and how do I get it in a way that it's usable, right, within the whole organization? Lorianne, thoughts on this, kind of what they are and what they're not?
Yeah, definitely they are a tool to use, kind of as Mallory and Christina both said, to show some of the time points and the, general processes are being followed. What they are not is, even with placeholders, you cannot just use metrics to show the completeness of the TMF. It still requires those manual checks. And placeholders can't predict every document, so that's never going to be a foolproof completeness tool. It's definitely something that helps, but it doesn't tell the whole story. So that you do have your metrics that you have from your system, but then you can also create metrics based off of your manual reviews. So look at what documents are you finding that are missing, and where, are they trial level documents, site level documents, are they different functional areas? And you can create your own metrics based off of them, throw them into pivot tables and say, here we can see across the board, protocol training at the site level is missing. So, still need to do your manual checks, but you can create your own metrics off of that, because it is good to be able to report out what you're seeing, not just what the system is seeing.
I think that was a really good point, Lorianne. I was just kind of making a note here. Metrics, when we say metrics, I think each of us says in our mind, metrics by study, but then also metrics by CRO. What a great tool for sponsors to use, right? To look at metrics across the CRO, because I think it really helps even at the governance level, right? So helping affect change on a broader level where you find challenges. And then metrics just across the company's entire TMF for sponsors, right? Like, are there just trends where if you just tweak things with a bit of a process adjustment, you might really be able to impact it. I think it was Mallory that was talking about metrics for rejected documents. That's a really big one. So for those of you who are using a platform that allows you to issue queries or somehow return a record to someone for a problem with that record, if you can capture that problem in kind of like a logical way or a standardized way, that's what I want, standardized way, then you can run reports that then show you, and you may look at something and you may see that there's a whole bunch of documents from just a single user, right? So we run reports by user, and then you can do some focused training, which is a really big impact with your metrics very easily, right? Just to do some training, or maybe a lot of people are making the same error and it's just a matter of communicating a standard. So I love using metrics for rejected documents, and it's something people don't actually think about, right? Because it's a little bit in the weeds. When we think metrics, we think like executive level, right? Oh, we want to tell the executive level that we're doing good. But this is really a great way to influence the quality of the documents of the TMF. So thank you. So Lorianne mentioned placeholders, and I know all of us love placeholders because they really are useful, but they also present a little bit of challenges. So I don't know, Mallory, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges of the placeholders or the expected documents, just to kind of maybe give our audience some tips on this?
Sure, because right now we are not using either process. It's all external, just for resourcing standpoint, and as we kind of bring everything in-house, we're building up to that. But right now we're just looking kind of at a risk-based management of how to use expected documents or placeholders and not doing 100%, especially just because at times the functional areas know more, so we're not going to try and pretend that we've got everything, and we're going to leave that kind of open. So yeah, finding the correct percentage of documents and the types of documents that we want to kind of pull into that kind of review is something we're looking for. And just, yeah, figure out the scope was a big challenge, and just making sure that we had somewhere where we could point to say, there are this many versions of the plan, someone told us that, and two are missing type of thing too. So the communication pathway, I think we've got it, but it's never perfect, so.
For sure. Christine, I don't know if you've implemented that as part of your rollout, but.
Not yet, but I have at other organizations. I do think, I think most study team users in most functional areas, they want an all-inclusive list of what should be there and what is there. The last couple companies I've been at, we outsource a lot, so we're not necessarily following sponsored processes. So I think, the big take-home message for me for study teams is always your SOPs drive what you have in terms of documentation, right? It's the SOPs and the regulations. So you can set up your system and you can say, well, I'm going to build in my structure, I'm going to build in my sub-artifacts based on the document types we collect here. But if you go outsource to a CRO and you follow those processes, those documents aren't necessarily reflected in your system. So I do find it to be challenging sometimes. Your internal form for IP release may be one form, your CRO may use two. So if you don't know that kind of information, it does feel very manual sometimes, sort of building that in. And I think outsourcing is where it becomes a pain point. I also think there's it's the management of it and who has visibility and who the right person is to manage that. So a CRO has real-time visibility into the site to know what's collected. Your CTA may not. So it's kind of like other system stuff. It's sort of garbage in, garbage out. It's only as good as you manage it. And I think that's, it's definitely a very resource-intensive activity to manage it as well. So I think you have to kind of look at the benefit to doing that versus the resource and to putting the time into it.
Great. Lorianne, any last thoughts on this?
Yeah, just to kind of touch on what Mallory and Christina both said, it is definitely resource intensive to properly and, in real time manage placeholders. And, as Mallory said, it's great. You can start with placeholders for some things. You don't have to implement placeholders across the entire TMF. Start with your plans and with, your basic things at your sites, kind of get used to the flow of it, and then kind of use that to then develop processes before you implement it for everything. Because it's a big learning curve for all people, the uploaders, the people doing reviews, people trying to find documents. You go up, this is a placeholder, it's not the actual document. So, it's a big thing, and you really have to plan it out in order to do it appropriately.
Great, thank you. So maybe we'll move on to a different topic, although I heard you guys, so we've been talking about records quality actually quite a bit, and records quality is a big piece of the TMF. And one of the questions I often get is, what's the role of the uploader versus the person doing the QC, and what's the role of the document owner for quality of the record versus the people doing the QC, right? And the example I always like to give is the informed consent form, right? So what is records management's role in doing QC versus the document owner's role? Lorianne, would you start maybe your thoughts on this?
Sure. There's different ways of performing the QC, but both people actually have responsibility for it. So the uploader really should be doing a complete check of that document before they put it in the TMF, make sure it's complete, they have all the pages, it's scanned appropriately if it was a scanned document. If it needs to be a certified copy, that process needs to be followed. So they need to take ownership of that. And then the QC review of it is really a second check of it. It's meant to make sure that what was supposed to be done and the document is complete was done. In addition, I think some of the uploaders, especially maybe some of the functional area uploaders, are not necessarily TMF experts where they know the nuances of where things should be filed. So that QC reviewer also is, checking the metadata, making sure it's filed correctly and it's in the right location. Data management documents, they can get really tricky, and data management may think they go one place, whereas that may not meet what the reference model is really trying to get. So it's good to have that two-part, check.
Exactly. Mallory, any thoughts on kind of the record quality and the role and overall health of the TMF?
Definitely. And we have some cases where the uploader is not necessarily someone really in depth on the department. So they may just be kind of a grunt worker, for a better term, of just they're given the stack of files, they need to upload it. And so then if you put a quality issue or reject it to them, they might not have any recourse. So we do try in our plans kind of point to, you may have someone uploading it for you, but at the end of the day, this department is responsible and we're going to expect it to be resolved. Even if we assign it to this person, that person then should know who to go to in their department. So kind of having that pathway, especially as kind of more people, if you outsource it, their uploaders maybe at the CRO, so maybe not quite as grunt worky, but still, you never know if the uploader is actually the person who may speak to it in inspection or kind of have to pull up that document if called for.
That's a really good point, Mallory. At the CRO, oftentimes documents are sent to a records department, right, to do the uploads. And so when you're building your process, you need to build a process that when that query goes back to that person, what do they do with it? That's a great point. Christina, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think, it depends on how your organization is structured. Some people have sort of TMF groups that handle it, like a CRO generally does have that. I think most on the sponsor side, most of us have moved towards having the functions upload because we get that message during inspection that functions are accountable, and so we're trying to involve them more. I do want to comment one thing Lorianne said about functions not being as familiar with the reference model. I think from my experience, one of the good things is like stakeholder engagement. So working with all of your functions to kind of hash that out, and then leaving the responsibility to them to kind of train and be experts in sort of those areas within the TMF and their functional area. Since it is really SOP driven, they should know the processes that they're following. But I do think, to Lorianne's earlier point, there are separate processes kind of under this QC bucket. So we all say QC, but what does QC mean, right? There's a document level QC that says, yeah, we have all the pages there, scan quality is good, et cetera. Or there's metadata QC. Yes, it's in the right place. We have the right information. And there's also sort of a separate process, which is more functionally owned, or should be functionally owned, which is more of like a file review. So we look at documents as they relate to other documents in the file. So if I take a 1572, looking at CDs and financials and data consent forms, whatever I need for my processes, I think that piece generally gets missed. And I think that is the most critical piece when it comes to, TMF completeness and inspection readiness. So just making sure you have that process built in, and you have the right people truly conducting that process, not a TMF group, but really the onus is on the function to know that, and that helps them get ready for inspection and storyboard issues and things like that as well. So
you made a really good point earlier, Christine. I was thinking you were talking about SOPs driving process, right? And so when we think about that completeness, we also have to think about our organizational procedures, right? Because they speak to what we're supposed to be doing. And I think that that's sometimes where, when we're doing completeness reviews, we forget about, our internal process requirements. And what comes to mind for me is just like study plans and our SOPs around certain activities, right? And one of the things that a question we just added at the last minute based on what we heard this morning was when we think about decentralized trials, right, and how we run them, in my mind, that creates kind of this whole new challenge with the TMF, right, because we're not going out to the sites and doing that in-person monitoring that we used to do, right? So we need some processes for doing this, and when we think about this, I have some, concerns about how this is going to impact TMF quality, just in general. And I don't know, Christine, if you want to just kind of speak to that a little bit. The challenges.
I will tell you, our organization is nowhere near decentralized trials because we're a small biotech. So I probably don't have a lot of information to add there, but I do think that, the systems landscape, I think, has changed significantly over the last couple of years. Sponsors have a number of different systems they use that talks, CROs are using systems and sites are using systems. So I think as everybody's implementing different processes, sort of aligning that and figuring out the oversight piece, I think just becomes a bigger issue for us to tackle. So it's great, we can work more collaboratively, but then how do you oversee and manage all of these pieces, I think is the tough part. So
yeah, it's a good point. Just that whole alignment thing. I think, Valerie, you've had some experience with this, just with some of the work you guys have been doing, right? So maybe you can give us some helpful hints here.
Yeah, so we've been doing things outside of the normal trip reports. And so when it comes to that, it was where to file these, how are we kind of aligning, because they are scheduled, they're recurring. So then doing basically the same as taking the site visit log and confirming with the trip reports of kind of filing them into additional monitoring is where we put them, which they're phone calls. So to me, that always makes me want to go, they should be in relevant communication. But since these are now used as evidence of kind of centralized monitoring, we're kind of calling them out special. And so it's been a learning curve from both sides, the functional areas, even the TMF group, because we did query some of these at the start, but we've discussed, we've aligned. So just kind of those new documents that don't fit into the reference model 100%, and change happens so fast on studies, but not super fast on systems where you have to validate and update and those things. So just finding workarounds and even just long-term strategies that hopefully at the end of the day will work a year from now, and everyone will know where these documents are.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. When we change our processes, companies don't think about, it impacts TMF, but really, I always say a good TMF implementation uncovers all the quality challenges in your organization, right? Because really everything related to running a trial has something to do with the TMF, right? I always like to say the TMF's your story of the study, right? And so as the story is evolving, our TMF has to evolve with it. I don't know, Lorianne, do you have any thoughts on this?
I think it's an interesting environment right now, and I think COVID kind of forced everybody into making some of these changes before they were ready, because we have no options. And it's definitely, you need to decide where you're going to file these documentation, like Mallory said, and then also adjusting your mindset when you're doing those completeness reviews. Before, we always did compare the visit log to the monitoring visit reports. Well, phone visits are not on the visit log. So you're going to really, maybe there needs to be a tracker for them so you can make sure they're complete, or some other way of making sure that everything's there, because we can't rely on the tools that we always used to rely on.
Yeah, I think that's just so true. And I want to encourage folks, we've got a couple of more questions here, but I'd love if folks could start putting their questions in, and we could maybe get some questions in the audience of topics that we haven't covered. I have a question. I love GCP, right? I'm one of those people that lives, eats, sleeps, and breathes GCP. But I really think that the TMF is kind of like a window into the GCP quality of the study, right? So it's not just about the documents, but it's kind of that story that the documents tell. And I was just wondering if you guys might share some of your thoughts on documents that maybe everybody doesn't think about, but really is interconnected to the quality of the studies. And Mallory, I'll ask you to go first.
Sure. Well, I've found it at a previous company and at this one, and probably other people have heard of it. For some reason, emails tell the story, especially if that's how you're giving your approval to say, like, yes, you can make this poster an advertisement. If you don't file that, it didn't happen. So I think it's very common, and I'm probably just harping on a point that many people have previously, but for some reason, emails just don't connect with people. Or if they even do a phone call, then kind of documenting that some way too. So if you are approving something over the phone, there's some record of it. Don't need your recording, but.
Yeah, oftentimes people think communications email, but communications can be, reports, or it can be used, or even communications related to eligibility. You can be filing them in eligibility. Like, you can kind of get creative, because it's always scary if you see like 4,000 emails in a section, right? Because I get scared two ways. One is, oh my gosh, it's in an email and I'm going to have to read through 4,000 emails to actually find the answer to that question, right? And then the other one is, oh, let's give the inspector access to 4,000 emails and make them look for something, and then they find something that maybe it wasn't the best thing for them to read, right? So I feel like organizing our communications, the better we can organize them. I think it's better from a finding evidence that we did something, right? And then during our completeness review, finding maybe some GCP issues that need to be addressed. And then as well as kind of keeping things organized so people, we're not going through things that we don't necessarily need to go through. Lorianne, do you have any thoughts on it's just that quality, those quality documents?
No, I think what Mallory said about the emails is key. And I think another key component of quality and telling the story of the study is making sure of that interfunctional area. So the data management is communicating with ClinOps about something. Like, you have to make sure you have those related pieces, because sometimes each functional area is worried about what they did, and you're missing somebody looking across the study, across functional areas. And then the other thing to keep in mind is your trackers. So if in your plans you're calling out that trackers are going to be used for this and trackers are going to be used for this, then those trackers need to be in the TMF. So if you're stating in plans that you're doing something, so sometimes reading the monitoring plan can give you a wealth of information about what should really be in the TMF. Are they collecting interim DOA logs at every visit? If it says they're collecting them, then they should be in the TMF for each visit. Are they, the big site SOP question comes up. Sometimes they're expected to collect the site SOPs on how they obtain informed consent. So if they're required to obtain it, then it needs to be there. So you've got to really make sure you're following your plans and you're putting those related documents into the TMF.
That's such a great point, Lori. And I had an inspection several years ago now where the plan, the monitoring plan, said that recruitment logs would be collected from the site every Friday. And the inspector asked to have all the logs that were collected, right? And so, of course, they had some, because some had gotten filed, but they certainly didn't have them all. So that's a really good point. Kind of goes both ways, right? Be careful what you say you're going to do, because invariably somebody's going to check to make sure you did it, right? And then make sure that if you did do something, that stuff's actually getting filed in the TMF, right? So it probably was that they were sent in to the CRAs. They just didn't actually think to file in the TMF. So yeah. Christina, how about you? Is there any other documentation we mentioned?
I think a lot of us from the sponsor side, we all probably have our own internal processes for what we look at in terms of, what kind of helps, what risk-based review. So what we look at in a file, what we think is important. I will say, I think really good guides are go back and review the inspection metrics, because it's always the same areas. Monitoring is always a big one. IP is always a big one. So I think if you're looking to kind of write out a process for where you think, that's a great place to start. and kind of build from there and just say, what are the high risk documents that we look at? So study plans and study documents and submissions and ICFs. So that kind of stuff I think is a good tool. But yeah, different pieces of the TMF. But I agree. I think a lot gets documented in emails and meeting minutes that never makes its way to the TMF, and you have to reproduce later, which is fun.
So we actually had a question come in about email, so maybe now's a good time. And the question was, how do you determine what is relevant communication for the TMF? What guidance do you give to the team? Anybody interested in taking that question?
I can, because I've repeated it quite a lot recently.
You have it memorized.
As we prep for these things, if there's any decisions, any instructions, any oversight activities that are not documented anywhere else, if you're not signing a plan to approve it, but you're like approving that, or if you do outline the fact that you need the QC review process documented, because I've seen that come up in inspections of, great, you have the plan or you have the ICF final, but where's the red line copy? Where does it show that the sponsor reviewed it and approved it? So if those are captured in emails and not meeting minutes, file that email, even if it's a chain, and then always, if you can, which is sometimes hard, keep the chain linear. If it starts to branch out, start a new email. That's a separate topic, which is always fun and professional, because I've seen some emails where we're like, we can't use it because of what you said right here. Everything was great until right here. So just remember that at the end of the day, you're going to be put in front of the teacher, and the teacher's going to ask you to read it to the class. So go in with that mindset.
Very good. Christina, any additional thoughts?
No, I think that's good. I think that's everything I would have there. Sorry, I had something, and I feel like I lost my train of thought midway through. But I do agree with the point of, I think that if I recall, I feel like the TMF reference model maybe has something that has some guidance on relevant communications for those on the line who are looking for something to start with. We do have kind of a one-pager, but like Mallory says, it's all about training and getting people to understand, like, how you document things and later easily reproduce them and speak to them. So you want to give somebody the information they're asking. You don't want to give them everything that they didn't ask for. So I think, we've all learned you can send an inspector in different paths if you're not really deliberate and cautious about how you document things and, how to do that in a professional manner.
Exactly. So Lorianne, I'll let you put a plug in for the reference model guidance.
Yeah, I was on the committee who worked on that. So yeah, definitely check out the DIA website for that. And then just a couple add-ons to this, like, kind of what Mallory said about being mindful what you're writing. Also be mindful of what you're making your memo line, like what is this email about? Because sometimes like that is pulled and that it helps determine the content of the email. So like that's a great search tool when you're looking for things. So really be mindful about what you're putting there. And then I had another thought too. I think it went out the window with Christina's thought. I can't remember. It'll come to me.
Well, I can just add, the kind of the rule I use is if I think I'm going to want to use this as an example for in an inspection, then I want to make sure it's in the TMF, right? There's nothing worse than a question comes up and you think, oh yeah, I've got an email for this, and you bring it out and there it is, and it's not, it wasn't in the TMF, right? And so with so many of our inspections now being TMF based, I think it makes it important that those emails that you think you might want to provide, then it should go on the TMF. Now I always hear everybody go, the other side of it is like, well, what if I don't want to provide it? Well, you don't get to pick, right? You don't get to pick, well, I don't want to show them that. That has to go in too. But certainly if you're going to want to show it, that has to go in. And I do hear people sometimes say, oh, I don't want to put that in the TMF. I don't want them to see that. You don't get to do that. Like it has to be there because it's still the part of the study. And what I always caution people about is that a perfect study is actually very concerning, right? Because where there's human, there's errors, right? There's mistakes, and that's okay. We expect that. And when that happens, we just want to show that we can close the loop on that, right? That we can close that quality loop. And that's kind of another document that I think is really valuable in inspection, and that's a CAPA, right? If an issue occurs and you write a corrective action, preventative action, for that particular study, you're going to want to show that to the inspector because it's evidence that you actually identified the problem, good oversight, right? And then you prevented the problem, you did something to prevent the problem, and that's good quality, right? So I think when companies say, oh, we don't want to put that in, actually, that's just part of your story. And then make sure that you've got that whole part to that story as well, for sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Lorraine.
Jump in with my other thoughts. Okay, so my other thoughts are: A, don't file every email. There's lots of non-relevant ones, and that just bogs down everything. And then the second thing is when you're creating either your TMF plan or if you have some type of business rules or something, make sure you identify who is responsible for filing that communication, because you don't want two different people filing the same thing. So you need to identify who's responsible for filing and how frequently. Are they filing them contemporaneously? Are they filing them monthly? But kind of outline that so whoever is responsible, like if you're working with the CRO and they're going to be filing, they need to have clear expectations.
Yeah, good points. And so I just inserted the link to the guidance from the TMF reference model into the chat. So if folks want to have access to that, I stuck that in there for you. Okay, I have another question. Totally different topic, ladies. So do you review the TMF index and provide an annotated version to everyone? When I started at my new company, I reviewed the index and added different types to help file unique circumstance documentation, and they also included metadata for COVID. So this is a great question. It's really about what tools do you use to kind of communicate the bigger story than just the list of different sections in the TMF. So Lorianne, do you want to start with answering it?
Sure. You should have like a TMF, either index or map, whatever your company wants to call it, that is a template that matches your systems. So wherever you're keeping everything. But yeah, it's great to add additional information in there that kind of would help people. So if you know your company's filing a document and it has a specific name and it goes here, put that on there in the comments or additional information section. And then you should be creating a study specific one as well. And that's where you can kind of put some of the quirks or eccentricities of that study. So something, they didn't, for remote monitoring visits, they didn't file confirmation letters. So, you can put little notes about things like that. So you can put some broad notes in there, and then at the end of the study, you can also mark out any artifacts or classifications that are not applicable. So you don't need note to files that things are empty, because that's a really bad habit. You can have that all on that study-specific TMF index or map.
Very true. That TMF index or map is really helpful. Christina, do you have some additional thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree with what Lorianne said. I think the only thing I would say is I've provided both the template, so attached to the TMF SOPs, I've provided the template to inspectors, and I've also provided the study-specific version as it relates to the study-specific TMF plan. So I would probably not put a lot of detail in the study-specific TMF plan in terms of, I might put the document types we expect. I wouldn't probably put notes, but I think that's a great sort of backroom tool and, living document you can use within the team. Process that they can refer to. I've done that in the past as well.
Mallory, any thoughts?
So we definitely use this, and we also try and keep up for the externally held ones, created one, and make the CRO use it. So it's matched across. If people switch around on studies, like they know that this plan exists and that it points to, if it's not filed in the TMF, maybe it points to the regulatory place or some other EDMS that you've got going on. And so that's been a huge tool, which is cumbersome because you never know when your CRO is going to update their system, and then you have to update your plan, and then you have to roll it out to all the studies. But we've got buy-in from that. And that has helped limit kind of the comments, because if they have sub-artifacts, we're not having to add it to our plan. But then internally, if they're using ours, kind of their plan names, we try to keep it CRO neutral, but then study specific. That's where if you call this plan something else, feel free to add it in the maybe called, just so people can find it. So that's been kind of a work in progress that will never end, but it helps. Thank
you. So I kind of have two thoughts. One of them is that some of those things that those rules that maybe go across all studies is to have a rules document, right? They're actually rules. And so a rules document that applies to everybody who's uploading content to your TMF. And then a thought on the CRO side as well, because the CROs do this, right? They have kind of they all call it something different, but we'll just call it an index to just kind of keep it easy. And it's study specific. And when you're doing your completeness reviews, and that, especially when CROs that have a really detailed index, a document may not be filed where you think it should go, but if it's filed where the index says it should go, then it's fine where it is, right? You don't want to move it. Now, you could debate if that's the right place for it, right? Like that's certainly a debate that can be had. But when that CRO publishes that as being a study, applying to that study, you want to make sure when you're doing your reviews, you're actually following that and checking it. Because I've seen teams get in trouble where they go, oh, well, this shouldn't be there. And, the reference model is a model. It's not like an exact, right? And it doesn't list out all your documents, and things are open to interpretation. And so I'm a big rules person. I'm a big sports person, and there's always rules in sports. And so I think rules help us kind of know what to expect, right? And so I like rules, whether you put them in your index or you put them in a rules document or wherever. I think it's helpful to really impact quality with these rules. It helps things, and it helps inspectors, right? Because your inspector knows what the rules are, right? So again, they can debate if your rules are good rules, but at least you've established a rule, right? And I think it, I don't want to say the word protects you, but I think it establishes a bit of a standard for you.
Yeah.
Great. So there's a great question from Alphonse, and I think it's a question we could all talk about all day, but how do you implement a TMF culture within the organization, right? It's just this whole concept of quality. How do you do that? Just maybe a helpful tip from each of you. So I see Lorianne's like, oh yeah. So do you want to just kind of share that?
It's so important, and it can be tricky. We've found that having TMF team members meet with the functional areas individually. So, just meet with data management or just meet with pharmacovigilance, and kind of pull up the reference model, show them which artifacts really apply to them, and kind of talk through them. And then, listen to them, like, what kind of documents are you creating, and help them decide on where they need to be filed. And it needs to be input from both sides. And I think if you can do that, the functional areas will feel like they've been heard and valued. So it kind of then the respect will come back on you as well. But those meetings with the functional areas are key, because I found that many people in those functional areas, and not all functional areas, and not all people, not putting anybody down, but they still kind of think of the TMF as the filing room, and they don't realize how it's changed over the years, and till they're in an inspection somewhere and they realize that the inspector's going off of that TMF. They don't really care what's in my SharePoint folder over here. So you really, you do need to kind of be a team player and really kind of meet with the people. And then if you can get some champion on each of those functional areas who, if we have a question, can we contact you? Like if we don't recognize a document, and the go back and forth that way. But yeah, it's just, you have to build those relationships.
Thanks, Christina. You've just implemented a new TMF, so I bet you've had some experiences here.
Yes, and I've done this a few times, actually, multiple times, actually. So I will say, I think, to Lorianne's point, stakeholder engagement is the biggest piece. You really, I think a lot of us in the TMF space, you almost have to be a cheerleader for TMF, as TMF is process. That's what it is. Like, so, TMF really just needs to support existing business processes. And I think part of that is figuring out how to align and partner with those functions to really understand how to support them. So data management has a distinct activity, ops has a distinct activity. How do we build a system that supports that? I think some of this is actually getting a little bit easier as we stop thinking about the TMF as, I call it the document graveyard, but like for those of us, who worked in TMF for 10 years, you used to send something to the TMF, you never thought about it again, right? You never use it. And I think we've moved, a lot of the systems have moved into more of what we used to see with legacy document management systems. So you actually create the document in the system, you review it, you finalize it, it lives its whole lifespan in the system. I think that's kind of a sales pitch you make for teams, but it's better for collaboration, it's better cross-functionally, and then the document's always there. You have everything where you need it. You don't have to worry about compliance with somebody getting something in. So I think understanding, like, you really need to partner with your functional areas and understand their function, and then how to make it easier and better for them to get the buy-in to build that as a tool rather than something we think about after the fact.
How about you, Mallory?
Yeah, so to beat a dead horse, it is functional area engagement. And we've had to kind of elbow our way to the table. And we forced people, we've put in access requests for people so that training is rolled out. So they're kind of, it's in their LMS. They kind of have to do it. So that has helped. And then since we're bringing a lot in-house now, just specific meetings with the functional areas, and then general ad hoc ones where people can come and go as they want, share their screen, share a document. So trying to keep it casual and light and not a requirement. So hopefully they kind of see like, oh, it's good. And then back to the first topic, getting those metrics and showing how they can use the system, that it adds value. It's not just you file your document, move on with your life. It's, oh, we could run this report, and like this could be used for our own health check. If we're trying to kind of grade how the study's going or the portfolio's going, you can look at, yeah, your metrics and see how that goes quarterly or however they want. But trying to get their buy-in to use the system as more than just as a graveyard.
I think engagement is really important, and actually Denise Harris made a comment here. We ask our functional areas to indicate what documents are expected when we are setting up the TMF for the study. So it really engages them right out of the gate, right? One of the concepts of change management is that people that are involved in something are invested in it, right? And so if you involve them, whether you're implementing a new system or you're updating your system or implementing new processes or just kicking off a study, when people are involved, they become engaged and they kind of buy into it, right? And so just the concept of change management, I think, is a great way to start to create culture within an organization. So we have time here for maybe probably one more question, and then I have a departing question for you. So this is from Ashley Cole. What would you say to people who want to use the TMF for tracking information, like when visits occurs and things like that, instead of outside trackers or sources? And so really like leveraging your technology, you know, what's the key to doing that? So Christina, thoughts on that from your organization?
You know, I think it's a discussion to be had with different stakeholders. So it depends on a lot of different factors. If you use a vendor and they're managing a CTMS system, you're probably paying them to manage data somewhere else that you can have real-time reporting into. We've had this discussion recently because we've been managing things on trackers. We do pay CROs to manage things, and we've gone through the exercise of looking at what's the value to manage it in the TMF. So some study data, really the source should never be TMF. It should be a CTMS system, or it should live somewhere else. I think you can certainly, you know, a lot of these cloud-based SaaS solutions, you can build them to be whatever you want them to be. So you can certainly house it there. But I think it does bring up other questions around who manages the data and access around that data. So if you're an eTMF system owner and you own that, and you're giving somebody an clinical operations, you know, access to manage data, I think you just need to consider those kinds of things as a part of that as well. So lots of different things to think about.
Mallory, Lorianne, thoughts?
Sure. So for this one, we're kind of using it as said, where working on flash reports for trip reports to then go to the study leads, but then really they're comparing it against a tracker from CTMS. So we're doing more of the historical, where if you want a real-time tracker, I think, yeah, unless you're using placeholders religiously and have that kind of support, it's going to be a CTMS or an integration with a CTMS.
Mm-hmm. Lorianne, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I think it can be tricky to try and use your eTMF as the tracker. If you do that, then there's no way to check that things are complete anywhere. So, I mean, even if you're sending an email that this needs to be added to the eTMF, like, then you have something to be, like, there's just no comparison if your TMF is your only source. So it would have to be handled very carefully, I think.
I think that, you guys kind of touched on this a little bit. I remember saying to my husband one day, I just can't wait till everything's on my phone, right? Like I can just use my phone to pay for things, and then all I have to remember is my phone, right? I can't wait for the day we just have like one big system that just talks to each other and, works together, and we have a way to send that information. We're on our road. We're on the road to that. We really are with our, different company systems they're all talking to each other. And I do think the day will come where we will be fully integrated. It won't necessarily have to be within the same vendor, right? But where we can really exchange information. I know that the reference model group is working on that information exchange, and I know that the different vendors are working to allow for this. But I'm hopeful that we won't be duplicating things 5 years from now the way we are today. So I think that's a little futuristic. So we have 3 minutes left. So I'm going to ask each of you ladies, because you all have been in the business long enough that you've had an inspection and you've had a document that you were like, oh my gosh, not necessarily that high profile document, but boy, am I glad I had that in the TMF. So just kind of think about that one document that the inspector asked for, and you're like, wow, I did not see that coming. Any thoughts, ladies?
I would say, to Mallory's earlier point, emails and meeting minutes. So many teams make decisions in emails and meeting minutes, and it is just a huge pain point if you're trying to reproduce one decision and you're digging through a study mailbox or thousands of emails in a TMF. I think we need to, like we talked about exhaustively earlier, I think we need to really strategically think about how and where we document things. And if you're making critical decisions in a certain forum, keeping a log of things, maybe so later if we need to reproduce something, here's where we made this decision, something like that. That's been my pain point from inspection time with emails, for sure.
No, and to that point too, like it's great to have the meeting minutes, but if it's only on that like 1 day's meeting minutes that action and decision happened, it's not fun tracking that day down. So moving towards kind of action and decision logs, even if they're not like they're embedded on the meeting minutes, and you file them as like a Word document, or they're filed separately. It's huge value added, and it makes people less insane if there's just one tracker that they can kind of go to instead of digging.
Great point. Lorianne, did you have a last minute thought?
No, I think, it's, you never know exactly what that inspector is going to ask for. So you really need to kind of make sure your TMF is complete. And, we say inspection ready all the time, but that really is key that, it's there when they're ready for it. And, FDA inspections are a little bit predictable, but the MHRA and EMA inspections are not predictable on their times. So, contemporaneous is key. And then, training, documentation of training, whether it's the CRA training, whether it's the site training, but they're always looking at training.
Yes, they certainly are. Training, and then hospitalizations. Mine was an email, a series of emails allowing for patients. It was for a psychiatric study, and patients were staying in-house, social admissions. They were staying between the two arms of the study, and there was an email to the sponsor asking permission. And so we were able to go check, because they wanted to make that a prolonged hospitalization, which was an unreported SAE. And so that magic email that we were able to find from like 7 years previously was just like a huge lifesaver. And I think we all mentioned communications, and it's those really super important communications that sometimes can save the day. So, well, I can't thank the three of you enough. This was so much fun. I think we could probably all talk all day about this, but thanks for giving this hour. And to the audience, thank you for some awesome questions. And Oliver, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Donna. That was a phenomenal panel discussion. I had a lot of fun just listening in. And some of the questions that were asked by the audience were fantastic. And I have to do a special shout out to Donna. I think you managed the discussion amazingly. So thank you for that. I think everybody on the team had such a great perspective to give, and different perspectives from different organizations. I think that's what made this panel really, really interesting. Of course, as a reminder to everybody, we have a panel discussion that ends every single day this week. So at 12:30 Eastern, for the rest of the week, you can dial into a panel on a similar subject. It's going to be tough to top how good this panel was. So your fellow advisory board members have a tall task. But I want to thank everybody who attended today. It's been a huge, great day and a great start to the conference. And we'll see you guys bright and early tomorrow for day 2.
Thanks, Oliver. Thanks, everybody. Have a great one.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.